Welcome back to another edition of the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. I am Paul Perdichizzi, and thank you for joining me. As always, we continue to break down the 2024 NFL Draft, division by division, team by team, sharing our thoughts on every single pick. Each draft class, favored picks, value picks, questionable picks, discussing the entire collective draft haul of every single team from each division, breaking it down by favorite drafts, ranking them 1 through 4 in terms of their division, in terms of what they did on draft weekend. If you have missed the first two parts of the series, the first part talked about the NFC East. We went through every single team in the NFC East, team by team. And in the most recent episode, we covered the NFC North, talking about the Chicago Bears, talking about the Detroit Lions, talking about the Minnesota Vikings and the Green Bay Packers. Up next tonight, we're talking the NFC South compared to the NFC East and the NFC North. I did not like the drafts, relatively speaking, for the NFC South teams nearly as much as I like the drafts of the NFC East and the NFC North teams. But let's kind of get right into it. We're going to start with the Atlanta Falcons. Pick 8 overall, the stunning selection of Washington quarterback Michael Penix. In the second round, an aggressive trade up, giving up a third-round pick to get to pick 35 overall to take Clemson defensive tackle Rook Orhoro. In the third round, at pick 74, to take Washington edge Braylon Trice. In the fourth round, at pick 109, they take Oregon defensive tackle Brandon Dorlus. In the fifth round, at pick 143, they take Notre Dame linebacker J.D. Bertrand. In the sixth round, they had a trio of picks. At pick 186, they take Alabama running back Jace McClellan. At pick 187, they take Illinois wide receiver Casey Washington. At pick 197, they take Georgia defensive tackle Zion Logue. Favorite pick, Braylon Trice in the third round. If he would have went late second round, I don't think anybody would have called it too much of a reach. I thought, once we got past the initial top pass rushers in this class, Trice was in that mix with a bunch of guys on day 2. So I thought he feels a little bit of a need there, has a chance to materialize into a starter for that Falcons defense. My favorite value pick was Brandon Dorlus. I thought there was a real possibility he was going to go in that pick 90 to 100 range and be a round 3 selection in the 2024 NFL draft. He falls to the 9th pick in the second round and goes off the board at pick 109 overall. But I like his game. I think he's a guy that has the ability. Some might look at him as a little bit of a tweener. He can play that 5-tech defensive end. He can kick inside and sub packages. Maybe they'll line him up inside. I like Brandon Dorlus. I think he adds a lot of versatility to that defense. And I think Raheem Morris was really looking for guys. Now listen, he came from the Rams. The Rams hit on a lot of defensive prospects in the draft last year and rebuilt their defense real quick. I think he had really targeted some of these defensive guys, whether it was the trade up to go get Ruke at the top of the second, Trice in the third, and then Dorlus in the fourth. They've added 3 pieces to that defense. All of them can get after the quarterback. There's a lot of versatility in terms of Dorlus on that defensive line, Ruke in terms of defensive line, and then Trice is that pass rusher. So really interested to kind of see how that plays itself out in terms of that defensive line. I think it's something that, they could really materialize here. I also think that the pick of J.D. Bertrand in the 5th round, he could be a versatile backup to that team. I think there were some people that liked him, the instincts, the play recognition. He could be a guy that really materializes into a valuable role player on that Falcons defense. Obviously, the questionable decisions, I'll save Michael Penix to last. The aggressive trade up for Ruke in the top of the second round with Jerzon Newton still on the board, I think is a questionable decision for sure. I like Newton more. I thought he was a top 25 player in this class. I did like Ruke. I thought he was more of a late second to early third. I do think giving up a valuable third round pick, I would have rather them almost go into next year's draft class. Maybe they could have given up one of their thirds, or gotten something back. I just thought giving up a third round pick to move up, the amount of slots they did was a little bit too aggressive. I would have tried to get there with a fourth, a fifth, a fourth, and a fourth next year, or even a third next year instead of a third this year, because I thought it was a deep draft class this year with all the offensive players, all the receivers, all the quarterbacks that I didn't love giving up a third round pick to move up there. I would have let the board kind of fall, see if he fell to them or kind of how it played itself out. And then the big elephant in the room is Michael Penix Jr. This is really two layers to it, because when it initially happened, I was like, this is the worst decision I've ever seen in the draft. And I still think the process, you can say, is one of the worst processes we've ever seen. If you love Michael Penix Jr., and I like Michael Penix Jr., I think he could really thrive in this offense with these weapons. But if you really love Michael Penix Jr., you should have known it before free agency started, which is like the second week of March. So like, I wouldn't have went out there and made the investment in Kirk Cousins. You could have went and tried to get a veteran, Gardner Minshew for a year, and then handed the keys over to Michael Penix. To go out there and give that 4-year contract. Now you understand it's more of a 2-year contract, but even in that third year, they could get hit with like a $25 million cap hit. If they trade him after 1 year, a larger cap hit, and maybe there is a conversation about them being traded. I just think the process is bad, because they could have used that money in free agency to go get, Huff as a top level pass rusher. They could have been more aggressive maybe to try to get Brian Burns in a trade from the Panthers. So I just think there were other ways they could have used that resources of that free agent money if they love Michael Penix. I think their thinking is Kirk Cousins can get us back into the playoff picture, and then maybe we can flip him for a draft pick and hand the keys over to Michael Penix, and maybe he can elevate. The problem with that is Kirk Cousins might get him back to the playoffs, but then Michael Penix in his first or second year, they might take a little bit of a dip backwards. Not everything is Jordan Love, where he could kind of, hit the ground and the Packers could have a really successful year. So there's a scenario where Kirk Cousins does get him to the playoffs, but then you're going to trade the guy who got you to the playoffs and hand the keys to a rookie. And it also puts an inordinate amount of pressure on Kirk Cousins, because Atlanta's not vested in Kirk Cousins. They were excited that they got him in free agency. They landed a guy who's a top 10 to 14-ish quarterback in the NFL. But now if Michael Penix balls out in the preseason and Kirk Cousins starts playing bad at any point in the regular season, human nature is you're going to want the 8th overall pick in the draft to see the football field. This isn't like, New England's not going to turn on Tom Brady, or teams aren't going to turn on, Buffalo's not going to turn on Josh Allen, or a team's not going to turn on, their franchise quarterback. There's no long-term, love for Kirk Cousins. Now they even know it's shorter than ever. So I think they're going to be very quick to kind of maybe say, we want to see what Penix can bring to the table. So I just think the process is bad. Now, if they hit and Michael Penix becomes great in 2 years or 3 years, no one's going to really care about it. And I do think in this offense, he could be a really good player down the line. But I just think the process and the way they allocated resources, and, it wasn't like, Michael Penix was probably always going to be in the mix to be there at 8. So I don't get why they went the free agent route and were so aggressive for Kirk Cousins and then also spent the 8th overall pick. I struggle with that, even though I do think there's a scenario where it could work out, where Cousins plays pretty well for them. Maybe they can still trade him for a pick on day 2, but we'll see. My favorite pick, let's take this to the Carolina Panthers. First round pick 32 overall, it takes South Carolina wide receiver Xavier Leggett. In the second round pick 46 overall, they take Texas running back Jonathan Brooks. In the third round pick 72, they take Kentucky linebacker Trevin Wallace. In the fourth round pick 101, they take Texas tight end Jatavian Sanders. In the fifth round pick 157, they take Washington State cornerback Charles Smith-Wade. In the sixth round pick 200, they take Mississippi State defensive tackle Jaden Crumedy. In the seventh round pick 240 overall, they take Michigan linebacker Michael Barrett. I didn't love the Panthers draft as a whole. I'll talk more about that momentarily. My favorite pick is Trevon Wallace in the third round. Speedy, athletic. A couple people had him in their top 100 boards, so I thought it was the appropriate spot potentially for Trevon Wallace. But I think he adds a lot of speed to that linebacker group. So he was my favorite pick, but that was more because I just have some questions about about their top 2 picks. My favorite value pick was Ja'Tavion Sanders. I thought he could have easily went still on the 3rd round. I get that some people are worried about the athletic testing, but I still thought very much like Isaiah Likely. Play speed much faster than time speed, show that he can get open in college, showed he could attack the seam, good route runner, after the catch, can make things happen. So I like Ja'Tavion Sanders a lot. I thought that was a good value pick at the top of the 4th round. In terms of questionable picks, Jonathan Brooks in the 2nd round. Listen, Jonathan Brooks was my 2nd favorite running back in this draft class, but they traded up to get a guy who I didn't think was far and away the best running back in this class. I personally had Trey Benson as my number 1 guy. I thought a lot of people did as well. But the trade up, giving up other assets, I think they could have let the board come to them a little bit. And if it wasn't Jonathan Brooks, you could have taken Trey Benson. If it wasn't Trey Benson, you could have taken Marshawn Lloyd. You could have added a really good running back prospect. I don't think Jonathan Brooks is on that level of a Breece Hall or a Kenneth Walker. I think he's a tier below. And the trading up for it, you invested a lot of money last year in Miles Sanders. Chuba Hubbard took his job. I just didn't think running back that high was a priority, as much as I like Jonathan Brooks. So I think it's at least questionable that decision to trade up, take a running back as high as you did, coming off a torn ACL. I think it's questionable. On the other side, Xavier Leggett, listen, broke out this year. Before that, he was kind of unknown, didn't really have much of a high draft pedigree in terms of people thinking he was going to be, a first or even early 2nd round pick. I thought there were other wide receivers on the board there, whether it was Ladd McConkey, whether it was Keon Coleman. I would have personally rather taken one of those guys than Xavier Leggett. I think he's a little bit raw. I think they're trying. I applaud them for taking a receiver and just keep adding weapons to hopefully see what Bryce Young could bring to the table. But I do slightly question it because I like Keon Coleman and Ladd McConkey a little bit higher. I thought Leggett was a little bit more mid-second roundish. He ends up going the last pick of round 1. I don't knock that either of those picks. I question it a little bit, but I do think I understand their thinking. I just think it was a little bit too high for each of them, and I really don't like the trade up to get the running back coming off the torn ACL, and then they took Jonathan Mingo at the top of the 2nd round last year. I think Leggett is a better player, but I don't think he's that much better as a prospect. And they're kind of just pushing Jonathan Mingo with Adam Thielen there, the trade for Deontay Johnson, and now taking Xavier Leggett that high. They're basically throwing it. It almost feels like they're throwing in the towel on Jonathan Mingo. And I thought Jonathan Mingo and Xavier Leggett were pretty comparable players in terms of their play style and how they win. And this just seems like completely drafting over Jonathan Mingo, pushing him to the back burner. I would have been more intrigued with more of a guy like Ladd McConkey or a different style player in a guy like Keon Coleman, a bigger guy. That would have been my route. So, I didn't love what the Panthers did. Their day 3 selections besides Ja'Tavion Sanders were all guys that, I didn't think, I think they're just depth players at best. I don't think they found any diamonds in the rough, but I applaud them for attacking the offensive weapon and giving Bryce Young 3 new players to kind of help him and help that offense a little bit. And then if we take this to the Saints, next up, 14th overall in round 1, Oregon State offensive tackle Tailis Fuaga. And the 2nd round, pick 41 overall, Alabama cornerback Kool-Aid McKinstry. In the 5th round, pick 150 overall, South Carolina quarterback Spencer Rattler. In the 5th round, pick 170, Pittsburgh wide receiver Bub Means. In the 5th round, pick 175, Texas linebacker Jalen Ford. In the 6th round, pick 199, Northern Iowa defensive tackle Christian Boyd. In the 7th round, pick 239, Eastern Kentucky offensive tackle Josiah Ezereum. Favorite picks here, Fuaga and Kool-Aid in their first 2 picks there. They were my 2 favorite picks. I think Fuaga is a long-term plug-and-play starting offensive tackle. He can play guard as well, but I think he's going to be a starting tackle. If he would have went at pick 7 to the Titans, I don't think anybody would have really raised an eyebrow. If he would have went to the Jets, where they were picking after the trade back at 11, no one would have been surprised. So for the Saints to get Fuaga there, I thought it was a really good plug-and-play, really good pick. And then Kool-Aid, I thought Kool-Aid still warranted going in round 1. So it's hard to, not only is it my favorite pick in the draft for them, it's also my favorite value pick for the Saints. I thought he was a guy that I don't know why people soured on him a little bit and, pushed him out of round 1. I thought he definitely should have been a round 1 pick. I think he's got the ability to be a number one cornerback for a team. So I thought it was a great value pick and one of my favorite picks for the Saints. Spencer Rattler, listen, round 5 is good value for Spencer Rattler. Pick 150 overall. I wasn't really into the round 2 or even the round 3. I thought more top of round 4 was where Rattler should go, like pick 101, 102, around there, the top 10 picks. So to get him at 150 is an intriguing thing. Rattler was once upon a time looked at as a guy who could be the first pick overall in an NFL draft. Now, a lot's changed, obviously, but for the Saints to get him there, Derek Carr is not a long-term answer there with a high ceiling. So I like the Rattler pick there. That was a good value pick. In terms of their questionable picks, I put Bub Means because I like some receivers left that were better, but it's hard to really question a pick in round 5. So I'm a little nitpicking there, but I did like, Fuaga and the Kool-Aid pick. Obviously, they didn't have a 3rd or 4th round pick. Other trades, obviously, I don't always love giving up future draft capital. But I like Christian Boyd. I thought he was a solid pick in round 6. I thought Jalen Ford was a solid pick in round 5. So not a lot that I could really question. So Means would be the one thing because I did like a couple other wide receivers that were on the board left, but he did really test well in prior to the NFL draft. And we take this to the final team in the NFC South, and that's the Tampa Bay Bucks. At pick 26 overall in round 1, they take the versatile Duke offensive lineman Graham Barden. In the 2nd round, at pick 57, they take Alabama edge rusher Chris Braswell. In the 3rd round, at pick 89, they took Georgia safety Tyke Smith. In the 3rd round, they also take at pick 92, Washington wide receiver Jalen McMillan. In the 4th round, at pick 125, they take Oregon running back Bucky Irving. In the 6th round, they take a 220 UTEP offensive guard Elijah Klein. In the 7th round, 246, they take Washington tight end Devin Culp. Favorite picks, Graham Barden and Tyke Smith. I love the Graham Barden pick. I talked about it when I was talking about the Packers. I thought he should have been the Packers pick. If he would have went around pick 20 or 21, I would have thought it was value. I would have thought it was fair and good value because I do like the versatility of Barden. I think he's a long time plug and play offensive lineman, whether it's at center, whether it's at guard. I think he can start at either of those positions at the next level. I like the Tyke Smith pick a lot. Very versatile player. He can do a lot in terms of the nickel. He plays some safety, but you can just move him around and do a lot. Versatile chess piece. He can play that star position that he played at Georgia. So I like the versatility that he adds there. Him and Antoine Winfield is going to be fun to kind of see them in that secondary area. Value pick, Chris Braswell. I thought he was one of the best edges on day 2. So for him to go almost at the end of round 2 at pick 57 overall, I thought was a really good value pick. In terms of questionable picks, listen, I wasn't the biggest Bucky Irving fan. There was a couple of running backs that were left on the board in round 4 that I liked a little bit more, but I do think getting another running back adding to the mix was smart because I think Rachaad White, his peripheral stats might not be as good as how he's performed. So I thought, I understood them making a pick in the 4th round at the running back position. A couple guys I liked a little bit more than Bucky Irving. So I question that a little bit. And even the Jalen McMillan pick, there was a couple guys left like Des Walker, Malik Washington, that he fell a lot. So obviously NFL valued them very differently. I like Jalen McMillan, the player, but I do think there was a few receivers left that could have maybe went there ahead of him. But I do like I do like the player McMillan, so I don't want to knock it too much. In terms of my NFC South draft rankings, I put the Tampa Bay Bucks at number 1. I just kind of talked about them. I really like Graham Barden. I really like Chris Braswell. I like the versatility of Tyke Smith. And, Jalen McMillan, I thought maybe they didn't need that position as high as they did, but I think he could step in and be a really good 3rd wide receiver there. You behind Chris Godwin and Mike Evans and kind of see where their future holds. So I do like the pick. There was a couple wide receivers, like I said, that I had a little bit higher in my rankings, but I do like McMillan a lot as well. And then, the Bucky Irving pick, he's got pass catching upside. He plays faster than his time speed. So there's still a lot to like about Bucky Irving. Maybe he could be that next Kyron Williams type player if the opportunity comes his way. So they were my favorite draft. The Saints with Fuaga and Kool-Aid at the top. I really like what they did there. So they were my number 2. I actually put the Falcons at number 3 because I did like I don't like the giving up of that 3rd round pick. I do like the investment on that D line with Trice, Ruke, and Dorless. I think those guys are going to materialize and really give that defense some punch that they need there to kind of upgrade that defense. And I do think that, the conviction they have in Michael Penix, if they are right, he could be a guy that could really produce with the weapons that they have in place there when the opportunity comes. And then I have the Panthers 4. I could have flip-flopped the Falcons and the Panthers and put the Panthers at 3 and the Falcons at 4. I did say I do like that the fact that the Panthers went out and got 3 offensive weapons to kind of help Bryce Young. I just question the decisions. I liked a bunch of guys ahead of Xavier Leggett. I thought moving up and drafting Jonathan Brooks when they could have let the board kind of play to them was a poor decision, especially with a guy coming off of a torn ACL. And then, I like the Jatavian Sanders pick a lot there. So I like the investments on the offensive skill players. I just not a fan of the players that they ended up with. I more am a fan of the process than the prospects. So that's why I put him there at 4. In the Falcons aspect, the process I think is questionable, but I like the prospects a little bit better. So that's why I put them slightly ahead. But overall, if we're talking the 2 other divisions I've done, I thought the NFC East and the NFC North had superior drafts to the teams picking in the NFC South. So 1 NFC team left. Next podcast, we'll break down all 4 teams in the NFC West before we kind of tilt this over to the AFC side of things. Again, if you're enjoying this content, get over to the website, S2SFootball.com. It's fastest and easiest way to get there. Check out our premium content tab. If you want to purchase the notebooks, it's still valuable. The rankings notebook would be far and away the most valuable resource at your disposal right now. But the scouting notebook has thoughts on almost all of the relevant offensive skill players, detailed scouting reports, fantasy spin, how they win, strengths, all that stuff, NFL role. And then the draft projections notebook, while the draft is come and gone, the draft projections notebook still has thoughts on almost 400 prospects, snapshot of how they win, developmental areas, their testing numbers, and details on a lot of defensive players, which is usually a lot harder to come by for fantasy circles. So that has all my thoughts on the defensive prospects as well. So on behalf of our sound tech engineer, David Nakano, and myself, thank you for joining us, and I look forward next time taking you from Saturday to Sunday.